Liberation of Terra. The Reagan space defense system was many times larger and more powerful than the others, and the engineers and scientists of the SLDF could offer General Kerensky no shortcuts to defeat it. Brute force was the only way through the Reagan space defense system. The general and his staff held months of conferences to shape the plans for capturing Terra. Codenamed Operation Liberation, the resulting risky plan was to swamp the Reagan space defense system with so many targets that most of Kerensky's forces would be able to reach Terra's surface. While his troops were preparing for the operation, General Kerensky issued a statement to Terra giving Stefan Amaris a chance to surrender. Amaris, by then almost totally insane, sent a long, rambling reply that, among other curious things, called General Kerensky the Angel of Death. Taking the reply as a no, the regular army continued to prepare for the assault. This could be the final battle, and no doubt the biggest. On January 23rd, 2777, soldiers on 8 worlds loaded into their dropships. General Kerensky, in his flagship, the McKenna's Pride, watched as ships began gathering around the zenith jump point of New Earth. 20 minutes before Operation Liberation was to commence, a taped message was flashed to all ships. Soldiers of the Star League, I have a few words to say before we begin. We've come a long way, my friends. From the far periphery to just outside home, we've fought battle after battle. We've seen our enemy fall before us. We've seen our friends die. Now tired, blooded, and battered, we're about to enter a battle that many have said is impossible to win. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps freeing Terra from the usurper is humanly impossible. If it is, I'm not worried. I've long known that the men and women whom it must have been an honour to command are more than just flesh and blood, that they are more than the sum of their physical parts. An unalloyed spirit runs through you like the sparks in diamonds. It is hard to put into words, but when I look into the eyes of even the lowest ranked trooper, I see the Star League, and I know that the worth of the Star League lies with the fact that it gave birth to and nurtured men and women like you. Friends, it is time to go home. Godspeed to all of you. The launch. Defeating the automated defences at Terra's 2 standard jump points proved to be the easiest part of the entire campaign. The SDS had 5 major immobile battle stations at each jump point, their weapons ready to attack anything that materialised and failed to signal the proper code. To deal with this, General Kerensky ordered the automating of 20 aging jump ships and 60 overlord dropships with sophisticated computer and guidance systems. The dropships' weapons were replaced with extra armour, their massive holds stuffed with explosives. These unmanned ships materialised in the Terran system and accelerated immediately toward the enemy battle stations. Though many dropships were destroyed, enough got through to detonate on their targets to destroy all of the battle stations. Almost 1,000 warships and troop transports surrounding the jump points of 8 different worlds waited to make the journey to the Terran system and responded within minutes after receiving confirmation that the last obstacle had been cleared away. Because of the premium on speed, the General reluctantly agreed to cut the distance between jumping ships to 1/4 the norm so that extra ships could pack the points and make the jump. After fully materialising, ships had just 5 minutes to clear the jump point before the next group materialised. If they made a mistake, groups of ships would materialise inside one another. There was also no way to stop the operation should something go wrong. Once started, it would not stop until the last ship materialised above Sol. Fate seemed to be looking out for the soldiers and sailors of the SLDF that day. Of the 932 ships that waited to make the jump to Terra, only 20 failed. 18 of those suffered dry failures at the point of departure without any loss of life, and of the remaining 2, the troop transport Richardson suffered a partial failure of its station-keeping drives upon materialisation. Captain G.T. Garrett, realising that he wouldn't be able to move his ship out of the jump point quick enough, ordered its dropships to launch immediately. The dropships made it clear of the jump point. The Richardson almost made it clear, but the corvette Mississippi Queen materialised with its prow inside the transport's engineering section. The Richardson exploded with all hands lost. The Mississippi Queen sustained heavy damage but vacated the jump point before the next wave appeared. Once the fleet was assembled into formation with the troop transports, armoured dropship carriers surrounded by warships, it began a high-G acceleration toward Terra. The orders for the warships were to protect the transports at all costs, though, not discussed in the briefing rooms of the warships, the ship captains understood the unspoken order from the admirals to sacrifice even their ships as a last resort to save the transports. 4 days before the main force was to rendezvous with Terra, 40 warships used pirate points to materialise just a day's travel from Earth. They were ordered to destroy as many drone warships as possible. Each Casper carried the firepower of a cruiser and had the manoeuvrability of a destroyer, and for the next 2 days the Star League ships fought the swarm of Caspers that gathered around them. The cruiser, Sovietsky Soyuz, was the last warship to succumb to the sheer number of drones. The 40 League warships had destroyed more than 100 drones in return. This left only 150 drone warships to challenge the fleet. With the main fleet still 2 days from Terra, the battle with the Reagan drone warships began. The drones, using the tactics that long-dead admirals had programmed into their distant computers, shadowed the fleet just outside weapons range, waiting to signal out ships to destroy. Occasionally, groups of 2 or 3 drones would suddenly accelerate and attempt to cut through the fleet with the ferocity of sharks. They concentrated their fire at the transports, destroying many. Whole divisions disappeared in a single pass of these ships. 12 hours from Terra, with the sudden brightness of their engine exhaust signalling their acceleration, all of the drones attacked. Admiral Grech ordered most of his warships to meet them midway, fighters scrambling from their carriers. The 2 fleets opened fire, the flash of laser and the angry exhaust of missiles casting eerie shadows on the hulls of the ships. Several drones would break through and drove toward the vulnerable transports, clouds of fighters chasing them down and destroying them, but at the cost of more transports. Debris traced the path of General Kerensky's fleet. As the battle wore on, the drone warships lost their tight organisation as more were destroyed. No longer able to make coordinated attacks on the transports, more Caspers began defending against the Star League warships. The unspoken order was also having an effect. Captains of grievously wounded warships aimed their vessels directly at drones. Most of the time, the automated ships easily dodged the suicide attacks, but these tactics by their human opponents seemed to confuse the drones and make them more cautious. By the time the fleet was 2 hours from Terra, the tide of the battle had turned. Star League warships outnumbered drone ships, and Admiral Grech's warships caught the enemy in a crossfire. With the transports safe, the fighters returned to their carriers for refuel and rearm. The drop. An hour from Terra, the fighters were ordered back into combat. They left their dropships and warships and headed toward Terra to destroy 30 key laser and missile batteries on the continents of Europe and Asia. To reduce their vulnerability to laser and missile fire, the fighters chose an especially steep descent angle. Many were shot down anyway, some by Republican fighters, but most by the automated defences of the Reagan SDS. Some mechs were already making their descent when the first fighters reached their targets. Dropships were already releasing armour and troop carriers. The few fighters protecting the reign of mechs and men had their hands full with Republican fighters that scrambled from bases all over the planet. Aiming for the thousands of mechs, the Amaris fighters had little trouble scoring kill after kill. If the fighters sent to destroy the SDS base couldn't accomplish their missions, the entire invasion was in jeopardy. The fighters almost failed. Losses due to enemy fighters, ground-based weaponry and the treacherous descent were higher than expected. The remaining pilots, chased by Republican fighters and fired upon from the ground, needed to make every bomb count. They succeeded, but with extremely heavy losses. Because of the skill and determination of the Star League aerospace pilots, 30 divisions made their drops onto Terra in relative safety. The first division down was the 146th Royal Battlemech Division, the George S. Patton Division, which landed within striking distance of Moscow. The other divisions landed as far west as Madrid in Spain, as far east as Magadan and Asia's Pacific coast. Their landings went unopposed by the Republican forces, who were holed up in the major cities and in Terra's 12 Castle Bryan. The few attacks came from aerospace fighters and other air units, which retreated quickly when challenged. General Kerensky landed a short time after the initial drop. He assumed control of the Patton Division and led the first assault to retake his home city of Moscow. As he did so, other units were launching similar attacks against other major cities and, more importantly, spaceports. The general's tactics were tinged with conflicting emotion as he manoeuvred his Orion battlemech down streets he knew so well. Every building, every tree, every monument in the city was sacred to him, and the general knew that this battle would damage Moscow as much as it would his enemies. Seeing what his city had become under Emperor Amaris, the defaced monuments, the hospitals turned into mortuaries, the parks where daily executions were held, enraged him beyond caring. Even the house where he was born had been destroyed. With the aid of the 11th Mechanized Infantry Division, General Kerensky pushed the Rimworld units, the 33rd Amaris Dragoons, Mech Regiment and Attendant Regiments out of the city, and surrounded them on the plains. For a long while, General Kerensky seemed to be waiting to call in airstrikes and artillery. Even when the enemy offered surrender, it appeared that the general would let his anger rule the day. After 2 hours of sitting in the cockpit of his mech, he finally accepted surrender. Invasion of North America. By January 2779, Europe and most of Asia were in General Kerensky's hands. Though there had been some bitter fighting, especially for the castle's Bryan, it was obvious that most of the Republican forces were massed on the North American continent. The Republican forces were using desperate tactics, including using entire city populations in chains as shields. To save lives, Kerensky cancelled plans to invade Africa and South America, and instead focused on North America. Getting there would be the biggest problem. Using dropships to ferry troops would expose them to the still active SDS ground weapons in the Americas. The 10 transoceanic tunnels that connected the continents had been destroyed by Amaris and were beyond quick repair. Kerensky then devised a plan that balanced safety and speed. On January 15th, a massive force led by the 322nd Battletech Division, the Antarctica Division, and the 9th Mechanized Infantry crossed the Bering Strait and entered the North American state of Alaska. At the same time, SLDF warships and fighters loosed an enormous barrage on the SDS ground weapons to cover the descent of thousands of dropships into the Mexican Republic. Resistance to the simultaneous invasions was much stiffer than anything encountered in Europe and Asia. The elite of the Amaris military fought the regular army for every centimetre of land. On the northern front, the Antarctica Division's tenuous foothold of Alaska was almost taken away when 2 Amaris divisions threatened to push it back into the frigid waters. Then Emperor Amaris assumed command of the continent's defence. He'd been a good strategist, but years of paranoia had eroded his skill and judgment. By March, the northern force, reinforced by a landing in central Canada, was working its way down the coast of Unity City. On the southern front, the 135th Royal Battlemech Division, the Van Diemen Division, was leading Star League forces north along the coast toward the court of the Star League. The states of Florida, Texas, and New York became secondary invasion sites, pinning down Amaris troops that might otherwise have gone to aid the Emperor. The Amaris forces made desperate stands against the approaching Star League troops during June and July of 2779. On the northern front, massive battles took place on Vancouver Island. To the south, Republican forces held the northern bank of the Columbia River against the 135th for 3 weeks. Star League forces finally broke through both lines, pushing Republicans back to the terrain around the court of the Star League by September. On September 3rd of 2779, forward elements of the 9th Mechanized Infantry were the first to see the court of the Star League. The 9th was known as the Pride of Puget Sound, because its ancestor division had once been stationed nearby. The final battles proved to be the bitterest. Republican troops, true to their periphery heritage, resorted to suicide tactics in futile efforts to prevent the League from regaining the city. Their desperate tactics delayed the final assault, which General Kerensky led personally. The victory of the long campaign quickly turned sour, however, when Kerensky learned that Amaris was not in Unity City. Even before Star League troops reached the court, Terran citizens welcoming the general told them that Amaris had spent most of his time pacing the Imperial Palace. Heeding the pleas of his wife, 2 sons and 3 daughters, Stefan Amaris had left Unity City for the Star Palace that Richard Cameron had built for him in the Canadian wilderness years prior. Amaris had renamed it to the Imperial Palace, and there he waited. General Kerensky left Unity City to his staff and turned his attention to Amaris. To make sure the usurper didn't escape, he called on his second unit in command, General de Chevalier, to lead a special assault force. On September 29th, mechs from the elite 26th Royal Mech Division, the Graham Division, dropped on and around the Imperial Spaceport, which was located near Amaris' retreat. General de Chevalier's drop, which was soon reinforced by dropships carrying more troops, disrupted the Republican defence and cut off Amaris' only avenue of retreat. De Chevalier, commanding regiments from the 9th and 26th Divisions, soon linked up with General Kerensky, who was commanding several regiments from the 328th Royal Mech's Lion-Hearted Division. Together, they defeated the Republican guards protecting the area. Despite repeated ambushes, Kerensky and de Chevalier subdued the opposition in one day and closed in on Amaris. The 2 generals, with 2 lancers and mechs guarding them, entered the large park that encircled the palace. Members of Amaris' personal guard had been warned that Kerensky would be coming in his olive-drab Orion. Actually seeing the mech and knowing who was commanding it was the mighty legend himself made them hesitate. General Kerensky pushed his Orion into a run, and by the time the Republican defenders in their armoured pillboxes on the wall began firing, he was halfway to them. He quickly reached the walls, where bad firing angles for the pillboxes protected him. As General de Chevalier and the rest of the two lancers silenced the pillboxes, Kerensky's Orion smashed the gates of the Imperial Palace. With that, the Republican soldiers inside laid down their weapons and cleared the way to Amaris's quarters. When the generals approached, Stefan Amaris, still in his now tattered emperor's robes, came out to meet them. He slowly drew the same laser pistol he used to execute Richard Cameron and laid it at the feet of General Kerensky's mech. He then looked up, as if expecting his conqueror to say something. When no response came, Amaris shrugged and began to leave the palace grounds. The sight of the former emperor walking ahead of General Kerensky's olive-drab mech ended the resistance of the few remaining Republican troops. From a side entrance, Amaris's wife and children emerged. They ran to catch up and fell into step beside him without a word. The general escorted his prisoners to the HQ of the 9th Mechanized Infantry Division, located in the remains of what had been a posh hotel for visitors to the Imperial Palace. General Kerensky treated the usurper like a gentleman and ordered a suite of guarded rooms turned over to the Amaris family. In return for treatment that he didn't really expect, Amaris gladly agreed to broadcast an order to his troops to surrender. The effect of Stefan Amaris's message was immediate. Republican troops, mostly in the 3 North American castles Brian, began to lay down their weapons and surrender. The message took longer to reach troops on other worlds, where fighting didn't end until early November. Enemy troops, who surrendered by the thousands, were treated with respect, as ordered by General Kerensky. End of the Star League. The general's advisors debated what to do with Stefan Amaris, his family, and his aides. Many argued that they should be executed immediately, but General Kerensky felt that executing Amaris and his people without a trial would make them a sham of all they'd fought for. Only a few sided with the general, but no one dared challenge the legendary leader. The prisoners continued to live on in their luxurious cells. After nearly a decade of war, General Kerensky and the SLDF rested. The people of the hegemony and in some other realms celebrated. Star League troopers were heroes everywhere they went. General Kerensky allowed the atmosphere of celebration to continue for a month. Then it was back to work. He ordered his units to assess the damage to the hegemony, salvage what they could and begin reconstruction. 2 weeks later, while cleaning up the court of the Star League and attempting to restore it to its former grandeur, troops unsealed the throne room. Even the most battle-hardened soldier couldn't take the sight or the smell of the room for longer than a few moments. The outrage was immediate. The cry for Amaris's head grew so loud that General Kerensky had to be careful about who he assigned to guard the Amaris family. Though he had been wading through the stack of administrative tasks that built up, the general had to see the room for himself. 2 weeks after the unsealing, Kerensky flew from the Imperial Palace to the court of the Star League. He walked into the throne room, which hadn't been cleared, and asked to be left alone. 30 minutes later he came out and flew back to Amaris's retreat. He ordered that Stefan Amaris, his family and his aides be marched into a courtyard, where soldiers with rifles waited as each prisoner refused a blindfold. The general himself gave the order to fire. When the deed was done, Kerensky was heard to mutter as he left, "There will be no sympathy for the devil." Later that day, the general ordered the bodies preserved and protected until he could decide what to do with them. Protector of the Realm. The Civil War claimed more than 100 million people. 4 times that number were wounded, 10 times that number were left homeless. The immensity of the devastation caused by Amaris stunned everybody, and a silence seemed to fall across the entire inner sphere. Ruling over this sad domain was General Alexander Kerensky. He announced that he was reassuming his title as Protector of the Realm, invited the Council Lords to come to Terra for meetings to guide us away from the memories of these devastating times. Relief supplies and aid began pouring into the hegemony from all 5 houses. Trading companies donated space on their ships to carry the supplies and donations to the hegemony, but it was the common people who made the most heartfelt contributions. A massive outpouring of concern came forth from the citizenry of the 5 realms. They gave what they could afford, often taking food from their own mouths to feed the starving in the hegemony. Even people in the periphery themselves, not yet recovered from the ravages of war, felt compassion for the billions in the hegemony and gave what they could. Many people were stricken with remorse upon hearing about what life had been like under Amaris. Some had relatives in the hegemony. Others felt guilty that their governments had allowed such a thing to happen. Many assuaged their guilt by travelling to the ravaged worlds that offer their time and skills to the reconstruction. People looked forward to seeing Alexander Kerensky become the next First Lord. His fame, considerable even before the war, had grown to superhuman dimensions immediately after the liberation. everyone took comfort in the thought that he would soon rule the League. The Council Lords reconvened in the ruins of Unity City on October 10th, 2780. The arguing started soon after. The Council Lords, who shared none of their citizens' guilt for having stayed aloof from the Civil War, fought amongst themselves for power. The past 4 years may have caused incredible grief to some, but they'd also created a wealth of opportunities for the House leaders. Among the few things that they agreed on was the appointment of Jerome Blake as Minister of Communications. They gave him the monumental task of rebuilding the League's communications network. They were also agreed that Kerensky would not be the one to lead them. To quiet public cry for him to become the First Lord, the High Council unanimously stripped General Kerensky of his title of Protector on October 18th of that year. They then ordered him to demilitarize Terra and to disperse SLDF units to their peacetime locations. In response, many took to the streets to demonstrate in support of the general, even in the Draconis Combine and the Free Worlds League. Before leaving, Kerensky asked to meet the Council Lords one last time in the throne room, which had been mostly restored to its former glory. They agreed, though not without some misgivings. After the 5 lords gathered, the general entered carrying the ornate laser pistol of Stefan Amaris. The Council Lord's uneasiness turned to near panic when the doors to the room closed and General Kerensky sat on the First Lord's throne. Though the lords must have feared for their lives at that moment, Kerensky merely began an impassioned plea to the Council Lords to be lenient with captured Republican soldiers. With a sigh of relief, the Council Lords listened and agreed to the General's proposals for the treatment of Amaris troops. He then left Terra for New Earth, the temporary HQ of the SLDF. There, he issued orders to his troops to treat the Republicans well and congratulated them on surviving the long campaign, saying, "In the coming months, some of you may envy the dead." He concluded that the universe has become a very different place, and you may feel that you cannot cope with it. Have courage. You and I have faced the worst. What comes next cannot be as bad. A week after Kerensky's return to New Earth, General de Chevalier approached him with word that all of the Star League troops were ready to help overthrow the Council Lords. General de Chevalier wrote in his journal that the general smiled but politely refused the offer, saying that he was too tired for treason. He went on to say that as long as there was a Star League, he would remain loyal. Historians have pointed out that Alexander Kerensky was a military man, not a politician. Others have maintained that Kerensky realised that his age and lack of heirs meant an overthrow would have only delayed the inevitable. As the weeks wore on and the High Council continued to meet, the continued existence of Star League looked more and more doubtful. The Council Lords couldn't agree on who would become the new First Lord, their meetings turning into aggressive auctions with each house attempting to trade huge sums of money, resources, and even planets in desperate schemes to become the ruler of the League. The only hopeful sign was the fact that the Council Lords were still on Terra and still talking long after the meetings had been scheduled to end. On August 12th, after 10 months of deliberation, the 5 exhausted and angry leaders agreed to disagree forever. With a short written statement that they brusquely handed to some reporters, the 5 left for the spaceport and their individual realms. The message reading, "After long months of intense negotiations, we have reached an impasse on the question of who should become the next leader of the Star League. It is our opinion that the inability to find a new First Lord makes any further decision-making impossible. Therefore, we officially dissolve the High Council on this day, August 12th, in the year of 2781. Mobilization. When news of the dissolution of the Star League reached New Earth, many soldiers believed that now Kerensky would have an excuse to seize control. Instead, Kerensky immediately sent messages to the 5 houses imploring them to reconsider their decision. For the next 2 years, he travelled to and fro across the Ionosphere trying to get the leaders of the 5 houses back into the council chambers, where he hoped they would reconcile and resurrect the League. His efforts had tremendous public support but did nothing to sway the house families who seemed to prefer the new political alignment. Freed of limits on the size of their militaries under the Star League Accords, the 5 families began massive build-ups. They turned to the skilled soldiers of the Rimworld's Republic, who were waiting for release from prisons in the hegemony. Recruiters from the 5 houses met every group of soldiers released, offering money, rank, position, and even titles to get them to sign contracts. Mech warriors and aerospace pilots often receiving huge plots of land for their services. In August 2783, General Kerensky heard that recruiters had been talking to SLDF units. When the general tried to keep the recruiters away from his troops, the House Lords asked for his resignation as commander of the SLDF. A month later, most of the 91st Heavy Assault Regiment, known as the Armadillos, deserted the SLDF to join the Federated Sons. General Kerensky realised that the spirit that had made the regular army and the Star League so noble was fast eroding. No one knows exactly when General Kerensky decided that the Exodus was the only answer. Most records left him with the general, leaving historians with only sketchy notes and hints into the general's thinking. Some have suggested that Kerensky was planning the Exodus even before the New Vandenberg Rebellion and the subsequent Second War in the Periphery. Other historians have theorised that it was not General Kerensky's idea, but General de Chevalier who originated the plan. Most of the evidence points to August or September as the time when the general settled on Exodus of the SLDF. Records show that in September, activity at the general's headquarters jumped dramatically and that the HPG station on New Earth was in almost constant use. On February 14, 2784, more than 100 division commanders and an equal number of lesser officers crowded into an empty wooden warehouse on Terra. General Kerensky and his high command then explained Operation Exodus to the astonished officers. The Star League still lived within the heart and soul of each trooper and sailor, the general said, but this new cruel age would eat away at that spirit in no time. If so many lost lives were to have any meaning, the essence of Star League had to be saved. Thus the Exodus. When Kerensky finished speaking, everyone present stood and applauded. News of Operation Exodus travelled quickly through the SLDF. Soon every soldier was talking about it, yet the plan never leaked to the Five Houses. Though secrecy was complete, many believers in the Saints Cameron guessed what was about to happen from reading Jonathan Cameron's letters. There were also indications that Minoru Kurita suspected Kerensky's scheme. Each soldier was eventually asked individually if he or she wanted to follow Kerensky, and more than 80% said that they did. Most of the remaining 20% felt that leaving would be improper. A few whole units decided not to go, and, like the Eridani Light Horse, played an important part in the future of the Inner Sphere. Most of the individuals who refused later died wearing the uniform of one of the five great houses. Ship traffic among SLDF bases rose dramatically after February 14th's meeting. Star League shipyards grew hectic as workers hastily repaired damaged ships for the coming journey. Because 200 more transports were needed to carry the soldiers' families and supplies, the SLDF went on a buying spree, snapping up all available ships from commercial jump ship manufacturers. Quartermasters began buying massive amounts of food and supplies. They bought on the open market from private companies in the other realms. Sometimes they even bought directly from the house governments. Star League military bases were stripped of all their supplies and parts, and families bundled up their lives into boxes and crates. Despite the scale of the preparations, the preoccupied leaders of the five great houses, except for coordinator Kurita, failed to realise what was going on until units in the periphery and the outer reaches of the Inner Sphere began moving in August. It wasn't until July, when the jump points around hegemony worlds were thick with warships and transports, that the five leaders began asking for explanation. General Kerensky gave them none. He banned the SLDF from communicating with outsiders, unless absolutely necessary. The Exodus. On July 8th, General Alexander Kerensky flashed a one-word order to the ships assembled about him at the New Earth jump point, and to the ships assembled above 50 other stars throughout the Inner Sphere. The order was Exodus. More than 1,000 jumps were made that day. General Kerensky's convoy headed into the Draconis Combine, making as many jumps as possible in the shortest time and making no outside contact. Across the Inner Sphere, other convoys were moving through the other realms toward the Combine. When asked the purpose of their journey, they replied, "Out on extended manoeuvres." They rested only in star systems with a sizable SLDF base. Food and other supplies had been stockpiled in these systems and were loaded onto the transports when the fleet reached the system. When the last group of ships was about to leave, the people on the base packed up and joined them. Some convoys stopped to pick up civilians too, as on the planet Helen. To the Five Houses, the Exodus appeared to be a military mission. Warships guarded each fleet of transports, and the SLDF's reluctance to explain their extended manoeuvres seemed to indicate that the general was planning revenge on one or more of the House Lords. Because Minoru Kurita had treated Stefan Amaris so well and Alexander Kerensky so badly, the Combine seemed like a likely target. The routes of the convoys seemed to confirm that suspicion. The SLDF was still vastly stronger than any of the House militaries, and it wouldn't take much effort to depose any ruling House Lord and declare that realm the true Star League. Each of the five House leaders remembered every real or imagined slight to Kerensky and was haunted by the fear of becoming a target of the general's wrath. House Kurita had the most reason to worry. The Kuritas had always been at odds with the Camerons and the Star League. Almost everyone except coordinator Minoru Kurita in the Combine felt certain that Kerensky was about to attack. Kurita believed he understood the honour-bound thinking of the general, and if he were correct, the worst response would be panic. The Coordinator told his realm to remain calm and wait. Coordinator Kurita's conviction that General Kerensky was planning to leave the Inner Sphere grew when the convoy's routes turned away from Luthien. The first transports and warships arrived above the Combine world of New Samarkand on October 2nd, 2784. Daily, more and more ships appeared at the Star's 2 jump points. By October 12th, the entire fleet of 1,349 transports, carrying more than 100 divisions and their families and escorted by 402 warships, was in the New Samarkand star system. The SLDF had 2 major military bases on the planet, each with large wilderness areas of deep forests and mountains. General Kerensky ordered that everyone be allowed to spend some time on the 2 bases before they left the Inner Sphere. For the next 3 weeks, a constant stream of planetary transports shuttled between the planet and the jump points. At night, the forest and mountains of New Samarkand were speckled with the campfires of men, women and children, all enjoying some rest before journeying on. Above them, their ships shone like stars in the night sky. During the shuttling, General Kerensky completed his last duty in his role of Old Protector. He gave the remains of Stefan Amaris and his family to the Medical School University of New Samarkand. On November 5th, as the last dropship was docking with its jump ship, the first group of ships left New Samarkand for the periphery. It took a whole day for all the ships to leave the system. The last ship to leave New Samarkand was McKenna's Pride. The fleet quickly moved through the periphery. The last known star system where the fleet was seen was above the sparsely populated world of Gutara 5, which coincidentally had been the site of one of Stefan Amaris' secret mech warrior academies. After the 1,000 ships of the regular army left Gutara, they were never seen again. Aftermath. It is a favourite cliché among scholars to say that General Kerensky and his men disappeared into history. Almost immediately after the exodus was confirmed, people began turning the story into romantic myth. Biographies, novelizations, hollow shows purporting to tell the true story of General Kerensky, the coup and the exodus came out by thousands, barely slowing when the succession wars had started. One of the most telling pictures ever taken in the First Succession War was of a Davian infantryman in a foxhole, his rifle in his lap, reading a book whose cover asked the question of the minds of billions, where did the general go? There have been 5 attempts to trace the path taken by General Kerensky. During the height of the First Succession War, when it seems that the Draconis Combine might conquer a huge chunk of the Federated Suns, the First Prince sent a fleet to look for the SLDF. The hope was that 5 jump ships could find the SLDF and persuade them to come back on the side of the Federated Suns. The 5 ships returned 2 years later. They'd gone more than 100 light years beyond Gutara 5, following a trail of debris left by the general's ships. The trail eventually became confused and then stopped altogether, forcing the expedition to return. The next 4 missions, 2 by the Federated Suns and 2 by the Draconis Combine, extended the scope of the search but yielded only a few tantalizing clues. Only recently, the guided light expeditions have provided a clearer picture of where the general and his followers might have gone. The explorers discovered that the general probably didn't continue in a straight line as everyone had assumed. About 130 light years from the periphery, the survey teams found proof that the fleet had changed course. This raises 2 new possibilities. One is that General Kerensky had a definite destination for his fleet, contrary to romanticists who believe that he just leaped off into the unknown. The other possibility is that his descendants could be living just outside known space, waiting and watching. If this proves to be true, it will help explain certain mysterious incidents that have occurred in the Inner Sphere since Kerensky's exodus. One of the most well-known of these puzzling stories is the one involving the Minnesota tribe. In 2825, as the Second Succession War was just getting underway, a regiment of unidentified mechs appeared in the Draconis Combine. From a convoy of transports and dropships, the regiment struck at the garrison on Svelvik, seizing supplies and then leaving. People were quick to notice that the mechs were in excellent condition and painted according to regular army standard. The regiment fought using regular army tactics, and wounded or stranded mech warriors killed themselves rather than being captured. There was a small symbol on each mech that was later identified as a map of Minnesota, a geopolitical domain of North America. The leaders of the Draconis Combine didn't need further proof to be convinced that the Minnesota tribe, as the regiment came to be known, was the vanguard of an SLDF attack. The Minnesota tribe attacked 3 more worlds, and during its last attack its mech warriors freed thousands of political prisoners on the Combine world of Richmond. The Minnesota tribe then left the Combine and was never seen again. Another curious incident was the departure of Clinton Cutthroats during the Third Succession War. A reputable mercenary unit, the Cutthroats had been working for the Federated Suns when a courier vessel landed in the midst of battle. A man and woman got out of the ship and asked to see the commander of the regiment for 3 days. They engaged in private talks with the unit's commander. Then, dropships, unmarked but obviously in excellent condition, landed and whisked the cutthroats off-planet and out of the inner sphere. These incidents are just 2 of many stories and observations that have accumulated over the years. Other stories revolving around the powerful Wolf's Dragoons, who many believe are part of the SLDF. Another favourite told in smoky taverns on cold winter nights is one about the New Vandenberg White Wings, squadrons of white aerospace fighters that appeared on the periphery edge of the Capellan Confederation, escorting 20 Star League transports. The disappearing battleship of Moreau is yet another story about a Black Lion-class battleship that was seen and filmed orbiting Moreau, but then vanished when ships from the inner sphere came to investigate. It is uncertain whether these stories are the wishful thinking of men and women eager for the return of the good days of the Star League, or whether these are factual sightings. What is certain is the possibility that descendants of General Kerensky and his forces still live. Just outside our sphere of light, men and women may well be watching and waiting for the day to return.